Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom. Giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Akakwadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwath and Melissa. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, back in here with another quick Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And a lot of just pretty much just an exhortation. I wanted to read a bit of this story in regards to our forefather Jacob and essentially what made him profitable. And I wanted to read this story, I guess, as well, just to arm yourselves with this kind of understanding, because a lot of Esau, a lot of his descendants, these Edomites, are basically they're trying to basically get at Jake. And they try to make you feel like you're less of a person. They try to make you feel like you're not important, like you don't have no history, and he is the superior man. And we understand that, going back to the story of Isaac and Rebekah, that there were two nations in her womb, right? And one of those people shall be stronger, than the other, right? So, our people need to understand that, we are those stronger people. You were very well sought after in the times of basically slavery, because not just because your physical prowess, you can be in the sun for, lots of time, what I'm saying? But Esau uses his pseudoscience to be able to, just destroy Jake's basically his excellency. There's this guy going around, trying to antagonize, a lot of the so-called Black Americans, right? And basically trying to justify, you know, um, just trying to just make fun of Jake, going around using the N word at Jake and so on and so forth, calling him nigger and stuff like that, So, long story short, I wanted to read this lesson because we are really a truly a superior people, but not just in physical wealth and prowess, but ultimately, because we're more nigh unto the Lord, right? And one of the things that makes us stand out is our a wealth of understanding, right? Because this is really supposed to, these laws, statutes, and commandments are really supposed to be our wisdom in the sight, of these other nations, right? And it should look at us essentially as the trendsetters in basically in righteousness, and that's going to be how it is, ultimately in the kingdom, right? Because they're going to look at us and they're going to understand that when the righteous people are in authority, they're going to actually rejoice, but not to look at yourself as the bywords, and not to basically allow Esau and these other nations to basically dim your light, basically. So just something, just exhortation just to keep in mind. So saying all that, I want to jump, basically I want to read a bit of this story here in regards to Jacob when he works for Laban, and how profitable he was, right? Let me actually get that word profitable in the etymology before I this is profitable. It says a yielding spiritual or moral benefit. It says useful. It says advantageous, expedient, helpful, in a specific sense, money making, right? Profit. Let's see what profit means. It means income derived from an office, property, transaction. Benefit, spiritual benefit, gain. So we're going to see how much of a gain and advantage Jacob was to Laban, during his time after his birth of the 12 sons, right, of the different tribes, right? So I want to read here. I want to read in an NLT actually. So this is Genesis chapter 30, verse 25. And the title on the top of here, it says Jacob's wealth increases. So it says, soon after Rachel had given birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, please release me so I can go home to my own country. Let me take my wives and children, for I have earned them by serving you, and let me be on my way. And you certainly know how hard I have worked for you, right? So Jacob basically, he was a hard-working man, right? That's something else to also keep in mind, right? Because Esau likes to paint this image, especially you so-called Mexicans, you Issacharites. You know, you're very well known, for people who are very hardworking. Other tribes ultimately, right? But that's one of the things that I just wanted to throw that out there as well, right? So not to allow Esau to, he's a slanderer, right? And he always does things to try and make you feel um inferior. you know he always has to, essentially, he always puts you, Israelites, in a condition where you feel like you're basically inferior, so it makes him look like he's superior, right? Esau really truly has low self-esteem. It's not you Israelites, right? It's ultimately because because he's done a very good at actually basically, what's the word I'm looking for, uh 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 tarnishing, the image, first and foremost, the image of our Lord and Savior, the Most High, the angels. He's done a very good job in thinking that he set himself up as the Most High, right? So our people don't think they've done anything, right? But through the Spirit of the Lord, the prophets are basically tearing down that stronghold and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of a Mashiach Yahushua, and showing you the real understanding, showing you the real revelation of not how our Lord and Savior looked, but the real people of the Lord, and how they actually conducted themselves, right? So I'm going to continue on here. This is verse 27. And it says, please listen to me, Laban replied. I have become wealthy, for the Lord Yahweh has blessed me because of you. Tell me how much I owe you. Whatever it is, I'll pay it, right? So you see how, profitable, I want to get to it, but you see already, profitable, Jacob was to Laban. And that's pretty much, of us as a whole, when you look at Jacob scattered through not just the empires, this empire, but the other empires that they were in, right? You saw how, so for example, later on, when you see when Joseph, he gets sold into captivity, and then eventually ends up in Egypt, you start to see how also he was very profitable to the Pharaoh at that time, right? He was able to actually offer the interpretation of dreams. So you see, for example, like forefathers like Mordecai, Daniel, you know what I'm saying? Like, when you see how they were, basically, the Lord had given them, gifts, to be able to, be profitable within, the space that they were in, the empires that they were in. And it's the same thing today, because these empires can't actually function, without our people. It'll be just completely dead, right? Yes, the heathens had their own empires, but at the same time, Jake always added a certain level, excelled in different areas, right? To actually make that empire like really stand out. You know what I'm saying? So this is verse 29, and it says, Jacob replied, and you know how hard I have worked for you, and how your flocks and herds have grown under my care. You had little indeed before I came, but your wealth has increased enormously. For the Lord Yahweh has blessed you through everything I have done. Now, what about me? When can I start providing for my own family, right? So this is basically shortly after the birth of the different sons, right? So he's got mouths to feed, basically, right? So this is Laban's response, and he says, so what wages do you want? Laban asked again. And Jacob replied, don't give me anything, just do this one thing, and I'll continue to tend and watch over your flocks. So it says, let me inspect your flocks today and remove all the sheep and the goats and all the speckled, and spotted, along with all the black sheep. give me these to be as my wages, right? So this is what he's asking for, right? And he says, in the future, when you check on your animals and they've given me as wages, you will see that I have been honest, right? So that's one of the things that we were actually created to be as well. We were actually created to be very honest, upright, individuals. When it says that Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents, that word is like, it refers to a person who has who has a certain level of uprightness, moral character. It's not you Israelites. You Israelites need to get that understanding out of your head. That you so-called Black Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, and even a lot of you speckled bird Israelites, right? you know, you need to get that understanding out of your head. You're not these thugs. You're not these bywords that Esau has basically put your names on, trying to basically, he's tried to dim basically your character, of how you actually are. You're not the savages. You're not the porch monkeys and the chimps. That Esau basically likes to demonize you to be, right? Continuing on here, and it says, "All right, Laban replied," and it says, verse 34, I will be as it will be as you say." And it says here, but that very day Laban went out and removed the male goats that were streaked and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and that had white patches, and all the black sheep, and he placed them in the care of his own sons, and who took them a 3 days journey from where Jacob was. Meanwhile, Jacob stayed and cared for the rest of Laban's flock, right? So all those different sheep that he was referring to, all the ones that were speckled and spotted and stuff like that, Laban took those same sheep and he gave it to the care, of his sons, right? So you've seen how Laban was basically dealing with Jacob, I'm sorry. So this is verse 37. This is where really what actually I wanted to kind of like hone in on, in terms of like profitability and how useful Jacob was, unto Laban here, right? This is why, a lot of these nations, they despise Jake, but they always want Jake around. You know what I'm saying? You know, they always want to make use of our people, right? So for example, like I'll use this as an example because recently, within the last year, not, I don't know if so much this year, but I know a lot more last year, you had a lot of immigrants. So a lot of the northern tribes, a lot of you so-called Mexicans and Latinos that were tending to a lot of these different agricultural fields within America, right? Because they were the ones who were actually dealing, they not only know how to deal with those crops, but they were very, very profitable because they were very, basically they had that work ethic to be able to do so, because a lot of these Americans here, those are kinds of jobs that they didn't want to do, right? So now basically you had ICE, chase them out, got rid of all of them, and now you don't have anyone to tend to your fields, right? So it's these Asians, they're very envious of you, right? Right? It says here, okay, so this is what I kind of wanted to read here. This is Genesis 30, verse 37, and it says in the NLT, "Then Jacob took fresh branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and peeled and stripped off strips of bark, making white streaks on them. And he placed these peeled branches in the watering troughs, where the flocks came to drink, for that was where they mated. And when they mated in front of the white streak branches, they gave birth to young that were streaked, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated those lambs from Laban's flock." Right? So this is what they gave birth to. It says here, because Laban took the wages that he agreed to do, and then he gave it to his sons. And it says, and at mating, he turned the flock to Laban to face Laban's animals that were streaked or black, and this is how he built his own flock instead of increasing Laban's, right? So basically, he's making that separation, right? And it says here, whenever the stronger females were ready to mate, Jacob would place the peeled branches in the watering troughs in front of them, how they would mate in front of the branches, and when but he didn't do this to the weaker ones. So the weaker lambs, I'm sorry, belonged to Laban. The stronger ones were Jacob's. As a result, Jacob became very wealthy. The larger flocks of sheep and goats, female and male servants, and camels, and many camels and donkeys, right? So I just wanted to read this in basically in the AI overview in regards to what do these sort of leaves, these green poplar, because in the KJV it refers to these branches as green poplar, right? And what do basically these do to actually help the reproduction of flocks and sheep? Just to show you more, how intelligent Jacob was, right? So it says here, so green poplar leaves and bark provide sheep with high digestible nutrition, about 65 to 70% of dry matter digestibility. And it says it's high crude protein, around 50%, 1.5, making it an exceptional supplementary feed, especially during summer droughts, periods of low pasture quality. So basically, it helps to, also for digestion, as well as keep like basically like satiated as well, right? So here it says increased fertility. It says research by Massey University shows that feeding ewes fresh poplar foliage during pre-mating and mating periods can increase ovulation and lambing percentages compared to grazing on drought affected pasture alone. So let's see if there's any more here. Reproduction. 1 second. So it says the supplement leads to greater proportion of twin pregnancies, meaning more lambs born per 100 ewes mated. It says during late summer droughts, typical pastures lack sufficient nutrition, causing ewes to lose weight and reducing ovulation. So poplar fodder provides essential proteins and metabolizable energy that stop this live weight and condition decline, right? So basically it keeps them in a healthy condition, right? So it, during the summer months when they don't have a lot of that foliage available, that green poplar, it gives them not just nutrition for that digestion, it gives them a certain amount of weight to keep on the body, to keep on the lambs and so on and so forth, right? And it can increases the ability to ovulate. So there's higher ovulation periods, right? So it says, continuing on, I just want to read like a little bit more. It says how it works nutritionally, because it mentions that there were, let me see, just read this again. It says that his the ones that Jacob had. So this is verse 43. Actually, I'll read verse 42, and it says, and when he didn't do this with the weaker ones, so the weaker lambs belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones were Jacob's, right? So this is one of the reasons why his lambs, Jacob's lambs, were a lot stronger, because he fed them this green poplar. He fed them, the right important nutrients they needed to actually be strong. It says here, undegradable dietary protein. So the leaves contain condensed tannins and phenolic compounds which increase the flow of beneficial microbial and undegradable dietary protein in the small intestines, triggering improved reproductive performance. So it basically gave them the actual compounds, it gave them the essential proteins. It was basically kind of like a one-stop shop to give the lambs to be able to be more reproductive, so they can give birth more smoothly, right? So this is one of the things that, this is one of the reasons why Laban didn't want to let Jacob go, because of, his knowledge, in regards to, his ability to tend to the sheep, but also his work ethic and character as well, right? Because this is how we're really supposed to stand out in the sight of these other nations. Because going back to the definition here, it says that somebody who is very, very useful to gain advantage, resulting in to the owner of capita. So he's able to actually increase, he was, able to increase, Laban's profit, make his herd more, what's the word, increase, right? Because of Jacob, right? And that's our forefather, right? So the scriptures say, inquire the ways of our forefathers. This is one of the reasons these other nations, they it's like a love-hate type of relationship, let me go here. This is Deuteronomy 4. Okay, let me get it in the KJV. Just give me 1 second. It's Deuteronomy 4 and 5, and it says, Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my power Yahweh commanded me, that ye shall do so in the land whether ye go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the other nations. And surely, which shall hear these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people, right? So this is the way we're supposed to look decked out. We're supposed to be the trendsetters in righteousness. And this is not to, people might think that, you're trying to, it basically, you just adopt a ruling class sort of mentality, right? Because you understand that you're built different, you're built above these other nations, you're not equal to these other nations, right? They always want to preach about equality and stuff like that while Esau rules over you. Where's the equality in that? We're not equals, man. No, we're not designed to be equals. We're clearly stronger and more intelligent, and more decked out, than these other nations, right? These other nations are as nothing, right? I think that says that in Ezra somewhere, right? Let me get another. Uh, This is wisdom. Ecclesiastes 8:1, and it says, "Who is as the wise man, and who knoweth the interpretation of a thing?" It says, "A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed." Right. So, a wise person, looks like, they have a certain, they have a certain type of look. They carry themselves a certain way, right? They don't, they basically like a shine to them, right? This is why the scriptures say to honor wisdom, right? That you may reign forevermore. And wisdom is the principal thing. Our people, that's their problem, is that they don't actually, see the value in trying to honor, wisdom, trying to understand there's a fear of the Lord. They don't understand the importance, of that, right? So, let me see, 1 second. Get one more here. this is just in regards to Laban's what he was doing. This is Proverbs chapter 10 verse 3, and it says the Lord will not suffer the soul of the righteous to famish, but he casteth away the substance of the wicked, right? So, that this the substance, even though Jacob was dealing very righteous, with Laban, Jacob essentially he got his wages, right? He got his substance, so to speak, right? So because he remained, it shows you the value of also of remaining righteous, and only we, as a people, but really and truly only the elect, and this time really have that kind of understanding of actually how to conduct themselves as righteous individuals, right? As Paul said, as you shine as lights in the world, so to speak, right? So I just wanted to read that, right? Because it's Esau is he basically is a forger of lies, and this is the type of vibration like likes to push, just to slander Jake's character and stuff like that, and make them, they need us around, but they don't like us, right? So they're very, very envious of us, right? So anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, this lesson was quick and edifying, so I give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.